X in Expert. They're here to talk all things jobs, HR, and trends. So mind the generational gap. This is From X to Z, only on the Purple Acorn Network.
Welcome back to From X to Z. Hey Mervyn, I'm Danielle Farage. Hey Mervyn, how you doing?
I'm doing good. My name is Mervyn Dinnen, and I'm good. I'm looking forward to the chats today.
Yes, we have a very fun topic to discuss. One that I think is on everyone's mind as we are navigating this RTO push. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this past fall, this winter, many companies are basically forcing their employees to go back to the office, starting, I think, with Jamie Dimon, who has been a longtime proponent of full-time 5 days in the week, 5 days in the office per week, and continuing with a number of other companies. We're going to be diving into how different generations feel about this and the impacts of these types of decisions. Mervyn, how are you feeling about the general RTO push? How do you feel like it's being received? What are you hearing in the field, and maybe how is it affecting recruiting right now?
Well, there's a few questions in there. The first thing I would say is that I'm an advocate. I often make the joke that I've been working from home ever since ever since no one would offer me a proper job in an office. But I think that it was inevitable once technology started. I mean, I can think back a few years, and people were asking, is it okay if I work from home on Friday? Is it okay if I do this, do that? So it was kind of, once we had the technology and we could log into the company system, it was obviously, depending on how enlightened the company was, it's something people would ask to do. Now, interestingly enough, I was involved in a piece of research back in 2018 where we surveyed 18,000 job seekers across 10 European countries. And what we found was that almost 2/3 of them said that they felt they were able to work remotely, as we called it then, that they didn't need to be in a fixed location. Um, and there was only 1/3 of them felt that they would prefer to be in an office location full time. So, as I often say, if you see me speak, the pandemic didn't cause this. All it did was amplify it. All it did was give it a kind of a live test. Could this work? And I think for many people it did. I think that where we are at the moment is that for a certain generation of leaders and managers, they want that physical presence for, I suppose, control, for feeling that they're knowing what's going on. There's kind of, I mean, if people are missing results and things, and maybe things, aren't hitting targets, a very easy excuse is to say, well, it's because they're not in the office. If they're in an office, I can see what they're doing and I can crack the whip. And it tends to be mainly older CEOs and directors who seem to think it's important. And I think that the genie is out of the bottle. I can't see it going back. And I think we're beginning to get the evidence from some companies who try to enforce this, that they will disaffect their people and probably start to lose them. I
Right.
don't know from your aspect if this is the way you see it.
So the hottest topic I think that I am asked to speak about is how the youngest generation obviously thinks about RTO and feels towards it. And I think for a long time there was a misconception, I think there still is, that the youngest generation, Gen Z, prefers to work from home a majority of the time, or prefers to not work at all, right? And so there's this stereotype of us being lazy and entitled and all of the other things. And I think that over time, and the studies have shown that not only does this generation prefer to work in the office part of the time, but we also are actually excelling in the workplace. There's a new study out, and we'll cover this, I think, in the next episode more in depth. But essentially, there's a new research study by Deal that came out and said Gen Z is becoming a top priority for employers. 36% say that Gen Z had the lowest percentage of contracts ended by termination of any other generation. So it's pretty clear to me that Gen Zers are becoming a priority for employers, but also there's another news story that's out, and a few of the statistics are really interesting regarding how only 1 in 10 Gen Zers want to work in the office full time, and I think that's pretty consistent with the research that I'm finding, the post-pandemic research that's out there about how many people actually want to work full time in the office. I think it's between 5 to 10%, maybe a little bit less sometimes. But I think that, and then there's these other stats just for reference. So 17% prefer to work from home all the time, which is a pretty big percentage, while 24% want to spend most of their working time at home. So I think there is this experience of work that Gen Z has come into, and I think they're probably their experience, and I speak to a lot of them. So, but I think it is that you go into the office and you're not necessarily as productive as you want to be. And for a generation that wants efficiency and values that, and values, their free time and live, work to live, I think that getting your work done is actually a pretty big priority for us.
Mm. Well, you do value your free time, and I, my experience of speaking to Gen Zers is that they don't want all the kind of hanging around an office and kind of being unproductive and chatting and doing this and that. Whereas if I think back to when I started work, it was a fairly standard 8 hour day, 9 to 5. And people kind of just filled the time. They expanded what they were doing to fill the hours,
Right.
as opposed to just getting done what they needed to get done, which they possibly
Yeah.
could have got done quicker, and
What
move on to something
what's
else. Because nobody nobody said, well, if you do today's work in 5 hours, you can go home for the other three.
Right. What's that? That's a psychology
Yeah.
philosophy that you expand the amount of time that you're working. But anyway, I think that what's also interesting to me is how people are utilizing their time in the office. And there are a number of different studies. There's a number of different companies doing a lot of research on this. I'm curious what you're hearing from the field, because what I'm hearing is that people are going into the office essentially, we're talking about more of the RTO push, the post RTO era, and many people are sitting on their laptops in Zoom meetings, not really interacting much, maybe having a water cooler conversation. But I'm curious, like, is it really what people expected that it would be? Is it a worse experience than it was before? Personally, I think it probably is, but I can't say because I'm not working full time in the office. But I am
Mm.
curious what you're hearing from that standpoint.
I think that again, going back to my generation, we tended to learn from the people around us. So you were in an office environment and you picked up how to do things, how we do things around here, by sitting with people, asking them, talking to them, people maybe showing there's a quicker way to do that. Um, and that's how we kind of grew with the role. There's a very old fashioned English expression called sitting next to Nelly. I don't know why that name appeared, but it
No.
was basically you you sit next to Nelly, you watch what Nelly does, and then you do it, and that's how you learn. So I think that the difference I see is speaking to people in your generation, and I do know quite a few. They just want to get on with it. I, I feel that your generation are comfortable that they can find out what they need to know as and when they need to know it. So they can have access to, how do I do this? You'll go online, you'll find a way to do it. You'll ask someone, Whereas possibly traditionally, you've got a level of management who would sit there waiting to be shown what to do. You knock on the manager's door, say, listen, I'm stuck a bit. Can I help you? Well, not now. I've got a meeting to prepare for. Come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That kind of thing for offices is how someone like me started a long time ago. And you respected that and think, oh, well, I'll find out tomorrow. Whereas I think, you guys just say, look, cry it out loud. It's out there. I just want to know how to do this. I'll find out myself how to do it. And I think there is that much more kind of not can-do attitude, but that I'm not going to hang around waiting for somebody to tell me what to do if I can work out how to do it myself.
Right. And I think part of that is simply that we are the digital native generation, right? I grew up, I'll just speak from experience. I had my first phone was like an LG chocolate. So it was like a normal phone. And then I got that at around like 10 years old. My next phone was one of like the flip up, LG flip up phones, which wasn't that different. And then the third phone I got when I was like 13, I think, was like a BlackBerry. What's a 13-year-old doing with a BlackBerry? Playing Brick Breaker, a lot of that. But at the same time, it's like we had so much information in the palm of our hands at such a young age that, I think there is this kind of, like you said, this can-do attitude. But I think what's interesting and a point that I want to underscore is one of the findings of this research study, which is the 1 in 10 Gen Zers wanting to work in the office full time. It's over half, 52% of Gen Z believe they are lazier than their parents' generation. Now, I think I can kind of explain where this comes from in that, my parents' generations, they're different generations. My mom is a boomer. My dad is Gen X. Yes, she's older than him, about 9 years. And I think those generations were raised to be a lot more of worker bees, right? More of this like industrial revolution era mentality. And it's not that Gen Z isn't that way or can't work hard, but I think the definition of hard work is different. And I also think that the incentives aren't as strong now to, let's say, we've talked about this before, stay at a company for 20 years, there's no pension, there's no lifelong employment. The incentives aren't there to stay at a company, and the incentives aren't really there to work hard for someone else your entire career, because we're seeing not only layoffs of people who have worked, 20 plus years at the same company like GM, but we're also seeing millennials get to the point in their careers that they were sold, right? These, as I like to refer to them, kind of lies. They've gotten to this point of, I've climbed the corporate ladder. I'm in a senior position. I'm a director. I'm a C-suite something. And I can't afford to buy a house. And so I think that this like lazier mentality is actually, it's less about being lazy and it's more about not seeing the point of putting yourself through so much work for someone else and for someone else's benefit to your detriment and putting other people first. So I think that that's kind of that's how I view it. And I don't necessarily like the term lazy because I think it's, it has a really negative connotation and it doesn't actually define the actual nuance that is involved in the mentality of this next generation.
Yeah, I think that, there was one thing I worked out recently. I was trying to explain something to somebody about kind of Gen Z and Gen X, and I wrote something about do Gen Z really have it harder? Yes, they do. And if I look, and okay, I'm based in London, so we're based in a big city in the UK. If I did a quick exercise and looked over the last kind of 30 to 40 years, property prices in a city like London have gone up 30 times, roughly, whereas the salary for doing a job has gone up like 9.5 times in that time. So somebody that 40 years ago would have been earning like
Crazy.
£5,000 a year doing something, is now earning like £45,000 a year. But the property they could have bought for £20,000 is now nearly £600,000. It's kind of so. A lot of this is what I think a lot of people, particularly from my generation, miss when they're talking about the younger generation. And they're talking about your generation. Is that it is tougher. The wage growth has stagnated. The price of most other things has shot up. But also the kind of training schemes that are available, the coming in, the apprenticeships to training
Yeah.
schemes, the qualifications that you could do, that's gone as well.
100% agreed. And I mean, there are definitely, some interesting companies doing, there was one I came across that they're basically training people, like students who want to go into finance, on like what a day in the life would be, and they're training them on those core skills and competencies. The problem that I see with that is that industry might be more likely to replace Gen Zers with AI than they are to hire more Gen Zers and to pay to upskill them. But then you look at, and I've been talking about this a lot recently in my circles, you look at these other industries like manufacturing, and they are like there's no talent coming in to replace the boomers who are, very fast and very rapidly going out the door. So I think it's interesting to kind of to think about, like, how are these industries going to reframe, and maybe it means, going back to what you were saying, maybe it means actually providing a livable wage. Maybe it means
Mm.
hiring fewer people, but really investing in them and investing in their long-term growth and developing really great programs. I've been working with a few clients on young development programs for their younger, Gen Z employees. But I think we're going to see a bit of an uptick in that in specific, industries like manufacturing. Another one was like industrial. I am probably going to be collaborating, hopefully, with an industrial tech company that has many programs to attract the next generation. So it's really interesting. But another thing that I've seen and that I want to continue to see, relating to what you were saying about the wage and the kind of the increase of, cost of living in relation to salary, I think is covering specific costs relating to cost of living that you wouldn't necessarily think to as potential benefits.
Yeah,
So of course you think of like gym memberships, right? But that's kind of
yeah.
that's like basic. And gym memberships, by the way, my gym membership went up 20% this year. So also having, considering like that inflation is a factor that's going to really impact each of our lives. Another one is,
Mm.
providing more meals and paying for more meals at the office. Another, I mean, there was actually a post. I'll try to find it and link it in the comments, but there was a post about like really interesting benefits that certain companies were providing. I'm curious, what have you seen from that perspective of benefits that might help lighten the load of like cost of living for people?
Well, I think that the enlightened companies who are trying to attract people from your generation understand that these things are important. That these things are important to you, but it's a good gesture to be able to offer that support. Obviously, when I started work, a gym membership, I don't know. I mean, I was never interested in joining a gym. But I mean, that kind of thing wasn't, people didn't leave work at 5:36 to go off to the gym and stuff like that. So it's that's a very different thing. Most of the benefits people were looking for were kind of pensions and things like that, and kind of maybe free lunches and stuff that I suppose lightens the load a bit. I'll work for a big company for a long time because I'm going to get financial benefits and training and stuff. Whereas, again, a lot of that has been taken away. And once you take that away, what's left is the experience. And the experience that's important is, as you said, the memberships, like the gym membership and things, being able to have flexibility over how, when, and where you work, and agency in how you work as well. These are the kind of things that I see as being quite important. Some of them you can't really put a figure on. But it's anything that can help. If you're not going to give somebody a long-term stable career with you, as way you might have done 30 years ago, then if you want them to work for you, if you want them to feel part of your organization, to feel engaged with your organization, and want to do their best for it, then you need to understand what kind of incentives would motivate them. And you've mentioned a couple there. So it's kind of, I think it's having enlightened leadership that understands that it's kind of, whilst these shifts are happening, and whilst they're probably not going to be hiring Gen Z to come in and do a long-term structured career the way they might have done 30, 40 years ago with the previous generations, they still need to make it worth your while to actually work with them and be part of their organization.
Right.
And this is a way to do it. So I think there are enlightened organizations out there who will do that. So I think that there aren't enough of them, I don't think, but it's not something I hear about all the time. But I think it is something that a lot more need to take on board.
Right. I retweet on there need to be more of them. I think a lot of organizations like to talk a lot, and they don't necessarily like to put their money where their mouth is. There was one initiative at Citi a few years ago that I heard about that was more about increasing the amount of, flexible spending that you would have like per month. And they got to a point where everyone at the company at least had like 10%, of their salary to be able to spend on whatever they wanted, or save the money. There's another one, another organization that was providing, it's really interesting because the buying patterns right now are so different. Everyone's, signing up for these monthly subscriptions to AI tools. There are a few companies that are providing kind of a stipend, like a monthly stipend for whatever personal or professional tools you're using. Like I'm always going to be using Canva. I'm always going to be using, ChatGPT or Perplexity. And so providing like a stipend for that, I've seen be a new benefit. And then also, obviously, if you're working flexibly, co-working spaces, memberships to co-working spaces, memberships to career development communities is a new one, a bigger one, because there are so many new ones popping up. But those are some other ones that kind of come to mind.
No, I can see that, and all of those have value. And I think that the way that organizations can now help to retain your generation's knowledge, your generation's appetite, your generation's drive and enthusiasm is by giving these opportunities. It's a very different structure now because there isn't as much of a career structure. So I think that there are a lot of different things people can do. I think if organizations really think about it, there are different ways they can keep people engaged without the career structure, if you like, that used to be what kept them engaged.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that any organization that says, look, why are we doing these different things for them? Who cares about that? We're only interested in the work they produce, will find it hard to retain people. And that means they find it hard to retain knowledge and skill, not just people, but knowledge, skills, and future potential.
Definitely. I think the future potential one is underrated and flies under the radar a lot. As we wrap up, I think my kind of takeaway from this whole RTO push, and if you are trying to get more people in the office and whatnot, I think the priority should be what is the reason. And I say that because
Yeah.
this generation is, my generation is very much about intentionality. If you want me to be somewhere, okay, but like tell me why and tell me what I'm going to be doing and tell me sort of the point. And I think that this next generation, obviously we are valuable. We know how to use technology, not that others don't, but we are digitally fluent. And I think that if you want to keep us, if you want us to be teaching our colleagues how to use this new technology and how to explore it, I think yes, in-person time is great, but make it intentional, make more programming, create more initiatives for mentorship and career development, create more lunch and learns. This is something that I do personally in my business is I go in and I help companies kind of facilitate these types of things and programs. So I would say that is my tip for anyone listening.
Mm.
Mervyn, any final thoughts?
Yes, about 14, 15 years ago, there was this big, not shift, but this thinking around kind of keeping. I suppose it wasn't even Gen Z then; it was still Gen Y and coming into Gen Z. But there was this kind of payoff in organisations that because more established, I won't say older, more established people who'd been there longer, maybe weren't quite in touch with these newfangled digital ideas and social media and things. And there was this kind of almost this payoff that I'll show you how to use your computer and I'll explain to you what Twitter is and
Yeah.
how to use it, and you'll help me because I'm struggling to understand how to put a report together, and because I've not done one before. And that was the kind of trade-off. Now I think over the last 15 years, it's probably changed quite a bit because the way companies, organizations are structured have changed and the way they engage their people have changed. I think that the biggest point I would make about this remote kind of working is that the most important part of the remote hybrid asynchronous flexible is flexible because I often quote that say, I mean, in the UK, something like 61% of jobs are location specific. Their healthcare, their construction, their hospitality, their retail, they are location specific. They can't be done from home. But what those people really want is flexibility, which is something they haven't had before.
Hmm.
They're flexible to maybe manage their shifts differently, and that's the thing that's important. So for the I'll say for Europe, I don't know, it's different. You've got in your land, you've got a new government who might be doing things differently. But I think that this kind of shift to flexibility is important, and understanding kind of how to help people reach their goals the best way.
Well said. I definitely concur with a lot of that. And we will dig into more on the next
Yes.
episode of X to Z. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find us on any streaming platform or at purpleacorn.com. Follow us, Mervyn Dinnen and Danielle Farage, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining.